Number 1. The wind. I love the wind. I love those days when the wind is just blowing everything around. I watch people in the parking lot of a store having their carts blown away. I love the sound of the wind. Most of all, I like the howl of the wind. It is amazing. The house I live in is really soundproof for some reason. Hell, the other day, I had the window open in my room. I heard what seemed like a plane flying an inch above our house. It was weird and very loud. In the other room, my family members didn't hear it at all because the window was closed. So that is basically what it is like to live in this house. I also live in a warmer climate. We rarely get anything like snow, but it does happen once in a while. A lot of the times, our winters consist of thunderstorms or windstorms. Thanks to me liking the wind so much, this is a good thing. We also get very swift and dramatic temperature changes, which make it windy. And the day just happened, it was very windy. I was still in high school at the time, but my entire family was out of town. It had been in the 30s the day before, but the temperature shot up into the 60s the following day. This was in January, so even for our area this was really odd. But we had winds over 20 miles per hour all day and into the night. I was happy that it was so warm outside because it made it possible for me to open the window and listen to the wind. I am a writer, and I'm a bit of a binge writer. While I might not write for days, when I do decide that it is time for me to write, I can write for an entire day. The wind was inspiring, so I decided to spend the day writing. I wrote for most of the day, and well into the night. And I heard all kinds of noises outside the house, but that was to be expected on such a windy day. However, at one point, I heard something that couldn't be explained by the wind. I have central air conditioning, and one of those large outside units with a fan, and I heard a strumming noise. It was as if something was being strummed across the top of the fan cover, and it repeated about 4 times, each time sounding exactly the same. I was alone in my house, and it was dark and windy outside, so my mind automatically went to a bad place. But I looked out the window, and I didn't see anything. The air conditioning unit was right outside my window. Someone could have been behind it, but maybe not able to be seen by me. I thought about it for a minute, and then I decided to go ahead and go outside and look. I was a bit nervous, but forced myself to do it because I didn't want to come across to myself as a chicken. I went out the front door. Okay, I took my cat with me, so I guess I wasn't truly brave. She didn't want to be carried, though, so I let her play around in the front yard, while I went around to the side yard. There was no one in the side yard. I went over to the air conditioning unit, and I checked all around it. There was no one there. Walking around to the other side of the house, I saw no one there either. I went back to the air conditioner. There was a tree in the side yard, but even with the wind, none of the branches could have reached the unit. I walked up to it and looked at the fan. Putting my finger on the fan cover, I ran my finger across the entire cover. Doing so, it made the identical noise that I had heard earlier. I was a bit freaked, and decided to just go back into the house. So I collected my cat and we went back in. I made sure the door was locked. But I did feel better when I got back to my room, and I went back to my writing at that point. After a while of hearing just the wind sounds and nothing creepy, I was soon back to just feeling fine at what I was doing. I was just enjoying myself. There were some other weird sounds coming afterward, but nothing at all like the strumming sound. They were all just normal outside noises that were all attributable to the wind. After a while, I got to a part of the story that I was unable to continue writing. I had to think about what was going to happen next, so I sat back in my chair for a while thinking, looking around the room. After a minute, my eyes went over to the window. It was dark, and looking away from the computer screen, my eyes hadn't adjusted to the lack of the light yet. I kept looking at the window, and as my eyes adjusted, I noticed something outside the window. There was a person standing outside my window, looking in at me. My first reaction was startle. I nearly fell out of my chair. The person looking in my window noticed that I had noticed him. The things that happened in the next few moments all blurred together. It sounded like the guy tried to remove the screen, which wasn't possible from the outside. I regrouped and went over to the window, and as I did, he changed his strategy. He took his pocket knife and thrust his hand through the screen, tearing it terribly. In response, I grabbed the window and slammed it down on his arm. He yelped, but his arm was caught in the window. The pocket knife dropped on the floor. I held his arm there as I tried to figure out who this guy was, and I did recognize him pretty quickly. The surprise at seeing him caused me to momentarily let up on the pressure of the window. This gave him time to wrestle his arm out of the window, and he ran off. I immediately went and called the police, and they showed up quickly. I showed them the knife and the hole in the screen and explained what happened. What happened was that a week prior, I had been attacked by a guy at school named Eric. He hung out with a group of guys who were bullies. They were asses to everyone and got into a lot of trouble. I became his target in the locker room when he thought I was checking him out. I am not gay, and I have no problem with gay guys. I simply looked in his direction at one point, and he got pissed off at me and started calling me a fag. He eventually came over and screamed in my face and pushed me into the locker. I was not injured, but the gym teacher saw it. Eric was suspended from school for 2 weeks for the incident. I guess he was going to try and hurt or scare me for revenge. The police went to his home and he denied everything. His father, first, was very pissed that his son was being accused of something that he did not do. However, when he saw the pocket knife, which he had bought for Eric, everything changed. Eric got in trouble legally for what happened, but from what I heard, that was nothing compared to the whipping he got from his father. You know, I normally don't care for corporal punishment, but I have to admit, however, in this case, it didn't bother me at all. Number 2. Winter break. This happened quite a long time ago in the 1970s. At the time, I was going to school in Northern California. I was from Minnesota, though. All I had at the time was an old beater of a car that I would use to drive home during school breaks. It was a very long drive that took me through many mountains. I was pretty fortunate that even though the car wasn't that great, I never had any problems with it. I was fortunate because I really didn't know jack about fixing cars. But the car had been my first as a teenager, and it got me to school. It also got me back and forth from school to home for 3 years as a college student. During my senior year in college, I was just finishing up my final exams. I was going to be going home for the winter break. It was exciting, especially knowing that I only had 1 more semester of college left. As normally, I did not leave immediately. I like to avoid the big exodus that happens on the last day of the semester. I waited through the weekend, and then I packed up all my things and made my trip home. I mentioned before that I have to travel through the mountains. The entire trip home would take me a few days. I brought blankets and pillows so I could sleep in my car. I didn't have enough money to spring for a hotel room, and still be able to afford gasoline and to feed myself. I was traveling through the mountains during the second day, and it began snowing really early in the day. I was a bit worried, but thought as long as I drove carefully I would be alright. However, the act of driving carefully then made my trip take more time than I would have liked. The snowfall only got worse and worse as the day had gone along very slowly. I would have liked to get out of the mountains before nightfall, but as the snow fell heavier and heavier, this appeared that it was going to be very unlikely. By night, I was going so slow that I knew for a fact I wouldn't be getting out of the mountains. So I decided that at the very next rest area, I was going to pull into the parking lot and try to get some sleep. Unfortunately, it took me a long time to get to the rest area, and of course, so much snow had fallen at that point that there was no chance that the parking lot would be plowed. Fortunately, however, it must have been salted because it was easier to drive on than the mountain road had been. I figured that it would be much safer for me in all ways to pull in there and wait out the storm. I parked a bit away from the building and then decided to lay in the back seat with my pillows and blankets. Laying in the back seat, I at first just watched the snow fall through the windows of the car. I guess it really wasn't until that point that I realized how stressed out I had been by the falling snow. I was able to relax rather quickly in the back seat of the car, and I fell asleep really quickly as well. I woke up. I thought I heard something. By this point, my windows had been covered with snow and were frozen, but I did hear something, and I felt my car moving a little bit. "Can't you just bust out one of the front windows and open the trunk from the inside?" I heard a voice ask. "No, I know this type of car." I heard another voice respond. "You can only open the trunk with a key." I froze as I realized that someone was trying to break into my car, and it was obviously more than one person. I didn't want to move, and I didn't know what to do. I was just freaked out. As I lay down, I eventually saw someone trying to brush off snow and ice on the back window facing me. It took them a bit, but after a few moments, I saw a pair of eyes staring right at me. I closed my eyes quickly. I heard a guy, now sounding nervous himself, saying that there was someone sleeping in the backseat of the car, and the other guy suggested they break the window and rob me. I was more scared then. I reached under the seat and grabbed a tire iron, and then sat up. It was then that the weirdest thing happened. I don't know if it was because of the window being frozen, but the guy looking in did not see the tire iron as a tire iron. He thought I was holding a gun. He yelled this fact to his friend with panic in his voice. There was some swearing more than I heard them running off through the snow. Eventually, I heard another car driving off. It happened so quickly that I really didn't know what to think. But I realized how lucky I was that they thought my tire iron was a gun. I wasn't able to fall back asleep after almost being robbed. But I did wait until the snow stopped before going out again. Number 3. No home. I had a really difficult time when I was in my late teens. I got into a horrible fight with my parents not long after I turned 18. Although they didn't kick me out of their house, I decided I would be a lot happier if I left anyway. So I stormed out of the house with very little to my name. At first, I couch surfed at different friends' houses. However, that couldn't go on forever. And it is amazing how quickly you might get on the nerves of your friends when you are staying in their home for a while. So after a couple of months of doing this, and a complete failure in trying to get a job, I ended up being homeless in the Chicago area. Although I didn't live in the city myself, when I went homeless, I went to the city. It was easier to panhandle there, and that became my main source of income for quite a while. It was sort of late summer when I first went back to the city. That wasn't really that bad. There were parks and easy places like that to find and sleep. Even sleeping in an alley is not that bad when it's warm outside. It was not even bad as it began to get colder. However, when winter hits in a city like Chicago, being homeless can be utter hell. Well, I guess if hell was freezing cold, it would be utter hell. It takes a while before it gets really cold in Chicago. While November and December can be cold, January and February can be completely unbearable. It's not really easy to find squatting houses. There's an underground tunnel in the Lincoln Park Zoo that has tons of homeless people sleeping in it. However, it wasn't particularly warm nor easy to sleep in. One of the most common ways that I had been able to sleep was that if I could get a few bucks so I could ride on the L trains, I could sleep a little bit. However, it wouldn't be for long periods of time. I would have to disembark at the end of the line, get onto another train, and go through that process over and over again. Although I had gone through some very difficult times before the end of the year, I was completely unprepared for how horrible the January weather was going to be. I was determined to find a squatting house. I was sure that it had gotten so cold outside that were I to fall asleep in an alley or something like that, I would get frostbitten all over. Even worse, I might have died. But the problem with a lot of squatting houses is that the people there might not let you in. They may want to get money in order just to let you sleep there. They may just be unwilling to share the space that they have claimed for their own. And they also might just be homeless people that know you and are unwilling to let you find shelter there. I had run into all these things in my desperate search to find a place to sleep. On the night that this story took place, it was unbelievably cold. There was a bank that had a digital sign outside that showed the temperature. I generally used that in order to know exactly what the weather was like. And this night, it was below zero. I wanted to get onto an L train, but I didn't have any money to get in. When I have told people this story before, they tend to always wonder why I didn't just jump over the turnstile and get in the train. Well, the truth is, I just never thought about it before. I also didn't go into McDonald's and steal food from people while they were in the bathroom. I'd only been homeless for a short period of time, and I guess I really didn't get to the point where I was willing to do illegal things yet. After looking around and walking around for a while in order to try and keep warm, I walked down an alley in a bad part of town. Far enough down the alley, there were 3 homeless men who seemed to construct a small fire in a garbage can. When I saw them, they noticed me too, since I had been used to being forbidden entrance to squatting houses and such. I wasn't expecting any kind of greeting by the 3 men, so I froze for a moment before I was going to turn and walk out of the alley. To my surprise, however, the 3 men called me over to the trash can. It was blatantly obvious that I was homeless, and I guess they had found some sympathy for me. They let me come up and warm myself by the trash can. We talked a bit, and although they didn't have any food, they had a bottle of alcohol that they allowed me to have a few drinks out of. After a while, I was able to cuddle up against the wall of the building, and as I began to feel drowsy in the warmth of the fire, and even though I was sitting in an alley, I was comfortable and really able to fall asleep. It was nice sleeping, and it was really sound sleep too. While I was asleep though, I guess my body or mind was a bit worried that I was sleeping so soundly. It's just not something that happens when you're homeless. You try and want to sleep soundly, but you're always on edge or something, prepared for something to happen while you were asleep. While I was sleeping, I kept on feeling like someone was trying to push or move me around or something. I tried to make myself wake up a few times, but I found myself unable to do so. But as these feelings continued, I tried harder and harder to wake up. Finally, after a lot of effort, I was able to force my eyes to open. Everything was hazy, but I could tell that the guys who invited me to sleep there by the fire were pulling my clothing off and using it to feed the fire. I tried struggling a bit, but everything was too hazy and too messed up for me to struggle against the guys. They managed to get most of everything off of me but my underwear, which I suspect was simply because they didn't want to see me naked or anything. A pair of underwear in below freezing weather doesn't do much for anyone, though. At that point, I got up and tried to get out of the alley. It was difficult for me to walk without falling over, and I did this a few times. I tried to find my way into a building or something, hopefully to keep myself from getting frostbitten. Not that it would have done me any good, as I was obviously homeless with an ugly beard and ragged hair, and how filthy I was. But it was the only thing I could think of to do. I blacked out, however. I have no memory of getting beyond the boundary of the alley. When I woke up, it seemed like it was much longer afterwards than it was. I was in a hospital bed. I'd been cleaned up and I was in some pain. I also barely was able to tell exactly where I was. A nurse came to talk to me and then brought my mom into the room. To summarize what happened after my memory ended, I stumbled out of the alley into the road and was hit by a car. Fortunately, and I'm embarrassed to admit this, I had written my name on my underwear in case I were to die homeless. I thought it was foolproof ID. There were traces of drugs in my system that I would rather not name, but they were likely in the flask that the homeless guys have given me to drink. That was what had knocked me out, and why I was so groggy when I got up. I had a broken wrist and 2 broken ribs from being hit by the car. I'm able to tell this story because I made up with my parents. I moved back home. I got a job and saved money, and now I'm in college. And this is much, much better than what I put myself through simply because I was being stubborn with my parents. Hey all, Killer Orange Cat here. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be doing a stream tonight, Sunday night, January 12th at 9 p.m. Central Time. If you like this video, please let me know by hitting the like button. If you're not already subscribed to Killer Orange Cat, feel free to hit the subscribe button and the bell below, or wait for the icon of Ichigo the cat that will appear at the end of this closing. Leave me a comment to let me know what you thought of the video, and please share it with someone you think might enjoy it. If you have an original story you'd like narrated on Killer Orange Cat, please send it to the address included in the description. But most importantly, make sure to check in your closet and check under your bed, because you never know where Killer Orange Cat might be hiding. Good night.